Kathy, I am so glad we can touch base again. And I just want to pick up where we left off and talk about how you got into the FBI and what was your process, how long it took to go through the academy, and then your assignments a little bit after that.
I didn't grow up wanting to be an FBI agent. A lot of the guys that I was at the academy with, they talked about, this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to be a police officer, a law enforcement, or be an FBI agent. And I don't think any of the 9 women that were in my class ever dreamed of being an FBI agent. And for me, it was just sort of an accident. I had initially planned to go to medical school to be a surgeon. And then by the time I got to my senior year at university, I realized it just wasn't what I wanted. And the expectation was that I would move back home to where I grew up in Kentucky, which I did not want to do. I had always wanted to see the world. I wanted to be adventurous. I wanted to do something that other women just didn't think about doing. And so a friend of the family who was a state trooper, he suggested the FBI. And I thought, okay, well, I'll apply. Probably nothing's going to happen. And lo and behold, I got the first call saying that I was qualified. And I think that at the time, probably what got me in, there were like 3 things that really the FBI focused on. Number 1, I was a female, and they were really trying to push for women in the Bureau. Number 2, I could speak Russian because I had taken Russian as my easy class with all those, medical classes. And the medical background, believe it or not, the FBI was starting to focus on medical fraud and healthcare fraud and things like that. So I think those are the things, the 3 factors that the FBI really, they were interested in at the time. And so I got into the FBI Academy after about 9 months of interviews and physical fitness tests and things like that. And the Academy at the time was a little over 3 months. I think now they've added maybe another month to that. So it's about 3.5, 3.75 months. It's pretty much what you think it might be, the FBI Academy. You go there, you have classes, and you go to the range and you shoot, and you have physical fitness, and you run and you jump and you do all these crazy things. And it's stressful, but it was also fun at the same time. You really bond with these people that you're in class with. So I loved it. As stressful as some parts of it were, which I do talk about in the book, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I'm sure it was a great stepping stone and a learning experience because your job after that was it seems as it's very spontaneous. You don't know where you're going to go. You need to be really prepared.
Oh,
And so,
yeah.
so after you finish the academy, from my understanding, you don't really get to choose maybe where you're going to go next. So what was your
No.
next assignment, and what were your responsibilities?
My next assignment was in Alexandria, Virginia. And they actually do ask you, where would you like to go? It doesn't mean that you're going to go there. So I said, I'll go anywhere west of the Mississippi. And I got Alexandria, Virginia, which couldn't be any further from the West Coast. But anyway, it was great. It turned out well. I had a great group of friends there. And the Alexandria office had a lot of female agents compared to other field offices and other female agents that I talked to. They may have been the only female agent in their office or one of 2. I was really lucky that I had other female agents that I could bond with. My first assignment was government fraud, which I hated. It was a lot of sitting on a wire, listening to wiretaps. And I just didn't think that governmental fraud was interesting. I mean, it was just really boring. And so I was kind of disappointed at first in the Bureau, even though it was a great learning experience and I did learn a lot. And then I eventually went over to healthcare fraud, which was, much better because, that sort of picked up on my background in medicine. But what I really, really wanted to do was work counterintelligence. And because of the Russian language background, the FBI said that I could take the foreign language test to go to the Defense Language Institute out in Monterey, California. So I took the test and I did really, really well. And so they gave me the assignment to go to DLI in Monterey and study Russian. Well, about a month before I was supposed to be transferred to Monterey, FBI headquarters called and said, you know what? The Cold War is over. We don't need any Russian speakers anymore. But they said, because you scored so well on the language test, you can choose any language that you would like to study. So are you interested in still going? And I said, sure. What languages do I have to choose from? And so they said Mandarin Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, and Arabic, I believe. And I said, okay, which one is the hardest? And they said, definitely Chinese. I said, I'll take that one.
Oh my gosh, they all sound hard to me, but good for you.
And, and it's not that I really had any interest in China, but I thought, you know what? It's a challenge and I loved challenges. And so I packed up and went off to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey. And the Defense Language Institute is where the military sends young soldiers to go learn foreign languages because they're going to be deployed someplace overseas. So it was me and 3 other FBI agents in a class of about 50 kids. And I mean kids. They were like 18 to 20 years old. So there are 4 of us, and we were all in our 30s. And then these young kids that we were in class with. And oh, these kids were so smart. I mean, these kids were picked for their abilities, to learn languages and things like that. And they were just whip smart. And so it was a lot of fun being in class with them. So I was there for 2.5 years. I took the basic Mandarin Chinese course and then the intermediate Mandarin Chinese course. So the first was about 1.5 years, and then the second was a year. So I spent 2.5 years learning Mandarin Chinese, and it was a challenge for sure.
That is very impressive. And then, so what did you use it for? What was your next step for that after you?
After that, I went to the New York City field office and I worked Chinese counterintelligence.
Okay.
And I was in New York for about 2.5 years. And then I really, really still wanted to work out west, one of the Western states. And when I was in California studying Chinese, my husband and I, Keith, we had just fallen in love with California. So I put in for a transfer to San Francisco and I got it. And so we moved it to San Francisco, and which is where I still worked Chinese counterintelligence, but there was a couple of years there where I actually worked international terrorism.
Oh, okay. It seems like, do you move often, as sometimes when someone is in the military? I grew up with my dad being in the Army, and due to his position, we didn't move as much as other families. But if you join the FBI or CIA, is it common to move and change locations often for whatever the demand is? Or do people usually spend a specific amount of time, or a
Mhm.
significant amount of time in one place? Or
It used to be the FBI's policy that they would transfer you more often, but they learned that number one, it's expensive to transfer people. Number two, people start to really, let's say they get sent to Chicago and they become sort of an expert in organized crime or something like that. And so they learn that, to take somebody away from that, you're taking that knowledge away from the field office where it could be used. So they really stopped transferring people as often. I have friends who stayed in the same field office their entire careers. They
wow.
didn't move. They didn't want to move. And a lot of people don't want to move, especially if they have families and children in school. They don't want to uproot them. For me, I actually really wanted to move around because I really wanted to work different disciplines in the FBI. And the way to get to do that is to go from, one field office to another. And I think that there is an advantage to my moving a lot because I realized that even though the FBI in San Francisco is essentially the same as the FBI in New York, it really isn't the same. You have the same rules and regulations, but there's different disciplines that you work on in San Francisco that you would never work on in New York. And that was a really major learning experience for me. So it gave me a lot more layered knowledge of the FBI than I would have gotten otherwise. And that layered knowledge really, really helped me when I went overseas as a legat.
Yes. Okay. Let's talk about that because that is so fascinating. And we happen to know, or I don't know him personally, but I am very familiar with him, someone in common, John Huntsman. But uh, so let's talk about your position there, being a legal attache. What were your responsibilities, the stress of it, the day in and day out?
My first assignment was legal attache in New Delhi, India. And out of New Delhi, I covered all of India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, the Maldives, and Bangladesh. And so I had a huge territory to cover as the head of the FBI. And there was a lot of stuff going on in that area of the world, as you can imagine, a lot of terrorism, kidnapping. There was like there for a while, in India especially, you had these large American corporations, and the CEOs and higher up managers, they were always getting threats to have their children kidnapped and things like that. So you had to deal with things like that. Um, all the other countries that I dealt with, Nepal, the Maldives, Sri Lanka, I mean, they did have some terrorism issues. So I worked very, very closely with them. And we also had some terrorism cases in the United States that had a nexus to those countries. And that really kept me busy. So I traveled a lot. I think I figured out, headquarters asked me one time, how often are you away from the New Delhi office? Because they were thinking that because it's so busy, they might want to split that region up into two legat offices, which they've done now. And I figured out that I traveled almost 70% of the time,
Wow.
which is it's really, it's a 24/7 job. So I was really, really busy, and it was very, very stressful. And I didn't really realize how stressful it was until I left. And I had about a 2 week time period between being the legal attache in New Delhi and then going to be the legal attache in Beijing. And so I had 1 month of home leave in between. And I think I slept about 12 hours every single night. I
Mhm.
was that exhausted. And then I got to Beijing, and it's a completely different animal. I covered China and Mongolia. And whereas in India and Nepal and Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, everyone was so cooperative. I worked with some of the most amazing people in those foreign governments, and I helped them whenever they needed something done, and they helped me. And it really was a relationship where we worked very closely together. It was completely different when I got to China. China was about as uncooperative as you could possibly get. And so getting anything done there was stressful, and it was like pulling teeth every day to get someone to respond to a request that we had. And it wasn't just the FBI, it was pretty much just the whole embassy. I mean, there would be times when the US government would do something that the Chinese perceived as, well, we don't like that. And so they would cancel all of our meetings. And Ambassador Huntsman, John Huntsman, was the ambassador at the time, and he would say, you know what? Just do your work. This is time to catch up on things. This is going to change in a couple of weeks. They're going to call us back and be like, okay, we're ready to have meetings again. And so you just knew when there was this lull in time that it was frustrating because you couldn't get anything done with the foreign government that you're supposed to be working with. And it was difficult because you would have these leads coming in from the United States and you couldn't do anything about them, but you could still catch up on your work because the Chinese were just sort of holding their hand up saying, we're mad at you right now, so we're not going to meet with you for a while. And it was it was sort of a roller coaster the whole time I was there. But again, I learned so much, and I wouldn't change it for anything. I mean, the Chinese people are wonderful. When we would go out and I would talk to people in Chinese, and they would just chat with me about anything I wanted to know about them. And they taught me so much about their history and their food and their culture, and they were very proud of it.
I'd love to bridge this because there's something in your book when you talk about John Huntsman and how he would hold the door open for you and let you go through. And I would really love to hear, and I don't highlight in this in every job, but this is a predominantly male driven position and career. I would love to hear what it was like to be a woman. I think I'm sure you weren't expecting to be waited on hand and foot, but at the same time, the respect that was shown of holding the door open or asking how you're doing, and it can be a little bit different when there's egos and there's a lot of testosterone. I'm not in every case, but I can imagine. And so what was that like being a woman? And also, did women champion each other? I remember in the book how you talked about how there was an instructor who gave you a bit of a hard time and when you were learning to shoot. And I was so impressed. This is my kind of girl. She's just going to keep going. And I probably would have been really mad at the person, but
Oh, I was.
yeah,
I just didn't
but it's
show it.
like you stayed pretty calm. But so what was it like? You had 9 women in your class, and then later on, your first destination, you had more women there. But what was it like? Was it really competitive with the women, or did they celebrate each other? What were the big things you noticed with your different responsibilities? I mean, being a legat, you're in charge. So what was it like to wear the pants, not only with all these countries, that have to listen to you, but also peers and stuff in a position where women aren't usually? What was that? I would love to hear that experience.
Um, when I first started the FBI, there were 9 women in my class, and I never really felt like there was any competition between us. It wasn't necessarily supportive, but we didn't try to hurt each other. I think everyone was just trying to get through.
Mhm.
When I got to Alexandria, like I said, there were quite a few women in that office, and that was such a wonderful experience. Some of my best friends came out of that office that I still am friends with. And we got to the point where we would have like these lunches together, which we called the Buchick lunches. And the guys weren't invited, which just upset them to no end because they thought we were doing nothing but talking about them at our lunches, which they didn't realize that we actually had better things to talk about. And then when I got to New York and California, San Francisco, again, really, really wonderful, supportive female system amongst the female agents and I shouldn't say just the female agents, but the female support staff. I mean, some of my best friends came from the female support staff too. And I think that as far as women are concerned, female agents, I really had a wonderful support system all through the Bureau until I got to the legat position. And for a while there, I was the only female legal attaché in the Bureau. So it was me and like 70 guys. There were a few assistant legal attachés, but when it came to, the legats having meetings and conferences and stuff, it was me and the guys. And a lot of the guys were very supportive of me. And I have been called out a couple of times because in the book I did not mention that. And so I'm mentioning it now. And I try to explain, well, that wasn't the focus of my book, but yes, there were guys who were very, very supportive of me. And especially, so the legal attachés are divided according to world regions. And so the Asian region, all the guys in the Asian region were very, very supportive of me up until the end. And then a couple of them sort of turned their backs on me. But I didn't really have any other women to talk to. I didn't have anyone to go to and say, what do I do here? And, I'm frustrated and upset. And I just didn't have anyone that I could, lean on. And that was kind of tough for me. I'm very, very fortunate that in both India and Beijing, I had 2 absolutely brilliant, wonderful women who were the legat office specialists, sort of like the office managers. And I became very, very close with them. And I'm still very, very close with one of them today. So that was good. Um, so I think that the legal attaché program was very, very, very much the good old boys club. And to have a woman in their midst sort of maybe offended them, or they didn't think that I deserved to be there, or whatever their thinking was. So it was lonely. It really was. It was kind of a lonely position to have. Other people in the embassy, on the other hand, like the other agencies, I got along great with them. I mean, in India, there were women who were the heads of agencies in that embassy, and that was really nice to have those women to talk to and become friends with. And it was kind of interesting. We were in my office one day having a meeting, and at the embassy, each one of us from the State Department and one from another agency, and then we were talking about terrorism. And we were each the head of our area where we focused. We were the people to go to on international terrorism. And one of the women looked at me and she's like, these men are probably just freaking out that if you need to talk about international terrorism, you've got to come to one of us. And they probably don't like it. And I thought, you know what? You're right. I hadn't really thought about it that way. For me, I was just kind of doing my job. But we kind of got a kick out of that. So I was really, really, really lucky to have women, not just in that embassy, but the other embassies that I had to travel to, like in Nepal and Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. There were women who were head of their agencies there. And it was really a nice, supportive, close-knit bunch. So my biggest support system when I was a legal attaché didn't come from the FBI. It came from other agencies. And for that, I am eternally grateful. The men that I worked with in the foreign governments, they treated me like a queen, treated me wonderfully. And I tell this little story in the book, and I'll tell it now because it relates very much. The last time that Director Mueller came to Beijing, he traveled around the world fairly often, and I was taking him back to the airport in the FBI vehicle, and the FBI Director Mueller, you didn't really talk to him unless you ask him a question. So it's usually very quiet. So I'm sitting in the back seat with them and I'm not saying a word. It's like, okay, when you ask me a question, I'll answer. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit here. And so he looked over at me and he said, Kathy, may I ask you a question? And
How polite.
of course, yeah, I'm like, yes, I'm the legat and I'm here to do the job that you told me to do. So yes, of course. I didn't say all that, but it's going through my head. And I said, yes, of course. He said, have you ever felt like you couldn't do your job because you were a woman? You could have like smacked me upside the head with the fish and I wouldn't have noticed, because I was so shocked because he never talked about anything personal, ever. Mm-hmm. And not that that's personal, but it's definitely not about the job.
Right.
And so I thought, wow, do I tell him the truth? Do I tell him how I really feel? Or do I just sort of go, oh yeah, la 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 la, it's all wonderful. And I thought, you know what? No, I'm going to tell him the truth. And I said, no, Director Mueller, I've never felt like I had a problem, doing my job because I was a woman. I said, but I will tell you. And then because he had said, he goes, because you work in countries where it's all men that you work with, and some of the countries are Muslim. And I said, every country that I've dealt with, they have treated me like a queen. And they have. I said, they've given me everything that they could possibly give me if it was in their power to do so. And I said, but I have had more discrimination from my own fellow FBI agents than I ever did anywhere overseas. And he just looked at me like that kind of shocked him. And then he was just like, I guess I needed to know that. And I was like, you did.
Which is really nice that you had the courage to bring it up. I think in any work environment, sometimes we have people who get nervous to stand up for ourselves. unfortunately, I had a vent myself with the work environment yesterday, but
Oh, no.
it's okay. But it's important to, who knows if the person will listen or take that advice or anything will be done with that. But I love the courage of saying, you could say, oh, it's fine. I'm doing fine. We're all fine. But if we really want progress, we need to listen to one another, and we also need to be honest with each other. If we have the opportunity to share something, we should. And I also want to make this a point. I don't think that all men are bad either, like how you said you didn't put that in the book. I don't think that. I just think it's important in, and for this channel that I'm doing, I want to highlight the possibilities that people could get into of maybe being a minority, and
Mhm.
what you might not be thinking about, but the unexpected. Okay, well, how could this impact me? And because this is a rare story, I think that is important to highlight, and that's why I want to. But what was it like on your mental health, and how did the FBI or any other organization help you stay mentally strong while you're doing this job? I think lots of us don't really love surprises in general, or we don't handle hiccups very well, or this was a 24/7 job, as you said, and it's emotionally draining, physically draining. You slept for so long when you took a break. I'm sure Keith traveled with you and he went along for the ride, but he was still supporting, but he couldn't
He
know
was.
anything. And so how was that? Sometimes it's kind of like you have to keep a secret and you can't share everything, and that's
Mhm.
can take a toll on someone. So how did you deal with that, and were you prepared for those type of things, and was that something that was addressed in the academy about your mental health, or did they do any kind of screening on those things, or that would be insightful to know.
Um, and when you are going through the background investigation to get into the FBI, they're really supposed to ask those types of questions, about, you know, the people that they interview, like your family, your neighbors, your friends, your bosses, whoever, about whether or not they think that you can handle being an FBI agent, which I think is a ridiculous question to ask. Because how can you ask someone who doesn't know anything about the FBI except what they see on TV whether or not this person can be a good FBI agent? And I remember where I was growing up, there was a lady who lived down the road, and she was just no nonsense. I mean, just no nonsense. And I remember her telling me that they asked her, so do you think Kathy would be a good FBI agent? She's like, well, how am I supposed to know? What is a good FBI agent? And I was like, she was so right, because I can only imagine that is an answer that most people were thinking. So, and when you get into the FBI, when I was going through the FBI, you didn't talk about mental health. You did not talk about going to a therapist. If you went to a therapist, you did not mention it at all, because it was definitely a black mark on you. Like you were weak, you couldn't deal with something, or whatever it is that people thought. And when someone actually did have an issue, there was this is a little crazy now to even be thinking about it, but apparently the FBI had a therapist, a psychiatrist that was in Chicago. And so if there was an agent who had an issue, they got sent to Chicago to talk with this therapist. So when something would happen and people would get upset, somebody else would say, hey, you better chill out and don't act like you're acting. Otherwise, you're going to get sent to Chicago. So being sent to Chicago was sort of, when you heard that, it's like, ooh, something's wrong with that person because they're being sent to Chicago. I know it's different now. And even before I retired, unfortunately, they had an unusual number of suicides. FBI agents basically shooting themselves with their service weapon. And I think that it was at that point that the FBI started to go, why is this happening? Why are we seeing this more often now? And I can only imagine that now it's even more stressful being in the FBI. Because when I was in the Bureau, I carried a gun 24/7. And every day I'd step outside the door or wherever I would go on an interview. You carry it with you, and you know that at some point you might have to use that gun. But for the most part, you didn't really think about it, even though you were trained to do so. It was just part of your day to day life. There was that gun, and you might have to use it. But you knew how. But for the most part, when people would go out on interviews and arrests and things, you would have information as to whether or not the person was armed and dangerous, or, let's say that you're investigating gangs. So you just automatically assume that gangs are going to have weapons. So whenever you go do what you need to do, you're prepared that someone could pull a gun on you. But now, when agents go out, everybody has a gun. And so you have no clue as to whether or not someone could be armed or dangerous unless you have intelligence beforehand, which is not always available. And I can only imagine that the stress that agents go through now is 1,000 times worse than when I went through the FBI. I don't know how each person prepares themselves to walk out the door every day, knowing that on a routine, I don't know, they could stop at the gas station on the way to work and fill up their Bureau car and, get shot because there are guns everywhere. And it wasn't that way when I was going through the FBI. Probably my highest level of stress definitely came when I was working overseas. And it really had nothing to do with being in danger. I actually felt safer in all the countries that I covered than I did in the United States. Most of the stress came from just the sheer number of hours that you're working and the number of things that you have to keep moving in your head and all the investigations that you're handling. I didn't really have anyone to talk to. I couldn't really talk to Keith about my work because all my work was classified. So you just sort of learn to, I don't know, hold things in. And I honestly didn't realize that I had been doing that until just recently, the last, couple of years. Even after I retired, I was constantly still vigilant. I still had that FBI agent attitude where, especially in the United States, you go to the movie theater, you sit down, okay, there's an exit, If somebody starts shooting, where are we going to go? What are we going to do? So always having that mentality of sort of your back against the wall so that you can watch everybody and see what they're going to do. And it's only been recently that I have been able to sort of unravel that piece and realize that that has been with me for decades and let it go, sort of just throw it to the universe and find this relaxed, peaceful person that hasn't been there for a very, very long time. I would think, I don't know, I can't speak for the Bureau now, but I would think that the FBI does have the means for FBI personnel to find someone to talk to, go to someone if they feel that level of stress and they need someone to sort of talk them through it and walk them through it. I am hoping that they do. I believe they do, because it's definitely necessary, especially now, much more so than ever before.
My last question would be, what would be your advice for someone who is looking into the FBI, or um, yeah, who's looking into it, or has maybe a child who's interested, and how they could prepare, or maybe if it's a parent, maybe not to be fearful that that's what they're going to do, or what would your advice be, maybe for both ends, for someone who would be preparing for something like this, they would like it, or for a parent to maybe give them some peace of mind because there are positives that come with this?
Um, that really depends on the age of the person who's interested in the FBI right now. I tell young women who reach out to me, I tell them, the good stuff. I tell them the bad stuff, because most of them have read the book. And, I tell them, go into the FBI and know that you can make a difference and that you don't have to change yourself. You don't have to become someone that you're not, which is, and I admit it in the book that I feel like that I did. And be yourself, be a woman, because as a woman, you have a lot of things to bring to the table, and don't ever, ever, ever let some man make you believe that you don't have something to bring to the table just because you're a female. And what I tell young, I honestly have not had any young boys reach out, but I have had a lot of young girls. And it's really just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I had a mother reach out to me, and her daughter was 15. And she said, my daughter read your book and she really wants to be an FBI agent. Would you be willing to talk to her? And I'm like, sure. So, I did this video with a 15-year-old, and, she'd read the book, believe it or not. I'm like, ooh. Um, and her mother was like, I let her read it. And I said, okay. I said, you're 15. And I said, if you are really serious about joining the FBI, that's wonderful. But continue to learn, continue to figure out who you are as a young woman and as you grow into your 20s, because what you want, what you think, it's going to change. You're going to evolve. And I said, but the one thing that I can tell you, that I still follow this for myself to this day, every day: stay curious. Always be curious about life. Always be curious to learn, not just knowledge from a book or a movie or whatever it is that you're absorbing. Learn about people, learn about other people, learn about other people from other countries, other languages and cultures. And that way, if you continue to stay curious and you continue to learn, you are going to absorb so much more about the world. And then you're going to have a better understanding, not only of yourself, but of them. And if you have a better understanding of other people, then maybe, just maybe, we'll get along a little better. And I know it sounds, kind of Pollyanna-ish, but it really is true. The thing that causes us to hate each other is fear of the unknown. This person's different. I don't know who they are. I fear them. And so I just don't want to have to deal with them. And so that would be it. Stay curious. And I do that for myself every day. What can I learn today? What am I going to learn today that's new, that's going to be surprising, sometimes challenging, sometimes frustrating, but I'm going to stay curious so that I can continue to learn. That would be my advice to anybody of any age who wants to be in the FBI. Because when you get in the FBI, you have no idea what you're going to be faced with. But as long as you stay open to it, you're going to be just fine.
I really love that. I stay curious. That is maybe I should tell myself that every day.
It works. It really does. I do that every day. Every day. Stay curious.